Alrighty, everyone. Thank you all for getting back to your seats. I appreciate that. I apologize that I was up here late again. Right, we're in a series about Sabbath, about rest, and we're continuing that again today. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 16. It's a big chapter. There's a lot to it, and so I've chopped it up a little bit just so we can kind of get the picture of the story and how it relates to what we'll talk about this morning. And so I'll be reading it today, so let's just dive into that right now. So this is Exodus chapter 16. Here's the first section. This is verses 1 through 5. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. They complained. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for the day. In this way I will test them to see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." Jumping ahead to verse 13. In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents." The Israelites did so, some gathering more and some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece. Then all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. And all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning." So they put it aside until morning, as Moses commanded them. And it did not become foul, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, there will be none." On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Do not leave your place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. So before we get into the text, I want to circle back to last week. Last week, before we all, as we wrapped up our time, I had extended the invitation to you all to put into practice Sabbath. And so I invited you to take an hour of freedom this past week. There's 158 hours in the week. If you could find 1 hour just to turn off the distractions, set aside the phone, and just be free, you could do that. So I'm curious, how did it go for you? And the question that we tied to that activity is, what did you learn about yourself? Now, you don't have to give an answer if you don't want to. If you want to share with me afterwards, please, I'd love to hear. For the sake of just transparency, I can show you. Well, I'll show you what I did because it's easier, I think, to show what I did than actually what I did. So I went fishing, which for some is not a shock. But I went fishing, and this is what I learned about myself. Typically in the past, whenever I would go fishing, I felt like I was trying to squeeze it into a few hours that I had available. And this time, I set aside an hour. I said, I'm going to go out and go fishing. And what I learned about myself in that hour, one, I was just more present in the hour. I wasn't looking at my watch or my phone to see what time it was or how much time I had left. What I noticed after is I was not as anxious as I usually am. Typically, my days are I drop our two kids off at school or daycare, and then I pick up our two boys afterwards. And so my day usually is structured between 9 and 2:30, 3 o'clock. And in the past, if I had a bunch of appointments in between that time slot, when 3 o'clock hit and I didn't get a whole lot of work done, like church work, I would be really anxious. I'd be all wound up, and I'd be frustrated, and I would be short, even with my boys. And what I noticed this week, when I took that hour, when I picked up Leo from school and I picked up Sam from daycare, I was more present with them. I felt like I was more connected to them. I felt like my demeanor and my mood was just a bit more lifted. I wasn't so concerned about getting them home and getting their needs met so I can take care of what I need to do. It's almost like I was being able to be present with them. And so I learned something this week from actually trying this Sabbath thing, is that and I don't want to over-spiritualize it, but it's almost like in a supernatural way, I felt like I had more time, which is a little weird. It's kind of weird to say, but I learned that about myself. And I believe that I want you all to try that too. I believe that if you set this time aside, an hour this week, and try just to be free, to live as this person who doesn't have to strive and work because God has provided for you, that you too can experience that sort of supernatural rest. My hope and my goal would be that one day we as a church, small local church, big church, we can be these perfect models of Sabbath to the world around us. And I have a picture of what I think that actually would look like, and it's this right here. This is my dog, Bella. I kid you not, this is what she did Thursday when I got home with my boys. She went out on her little hammock and she laid down. And I thought, that's what Sabbath looks like. Like, she does not care. She is happy in the sun. So, John, thank you for your prayers for my dog. I appreciate it. All right. Let's now talk about today. So we heard our story of Israel as they are in the wilderness. And this is the story, if you've grown up in church or around church or went to Bible school or a Christian school, it's the story of manna and quail, God providing for his people in the wilderness. And the big idea that I want us to be able to walk with today is that Sabbath is the practice of trusting that God is enough. All right? That Sabbath, when we rest, when we take a break from what we're doing, what we are actually putting into practice is that we believe and we trust that God is enough, that God can provide for us, okay? And so let's kind of walk through our story again, just so we have well, before we walk through our story, let me set the table for us. Is it safe to say that we live in a culture today of more? Like, we live in a culture of more, right? More money, more accomplishments, more accolades, more status. We live in this world, in this culture that demands that you and me, we need more. We need more things, right? And what's interesting is that when we live in a culture, in a society that sort of demands that you need more or expects that you have more, what's the opposite then is that if you don't have more, then that means you don't have enough yet. And I think what's really important is that part of the yet, is that for those of us who don't have as much as someone else, whether it's again, time, money, you name it, right? If we don't have enough of something yet, we feel this pull and this urge to get more. And so we work harder, we work longer, we save more, we watch our bank accounts or our calendars. We do things to get more because we don't have enough yet. And what happens is when we live that way, when we live in a world and with a mentality of we're trying to strive to get more, to get more or save more, whatever it is, we get tired because it seems like there's just never enough. That we get tired and we get agitated, we get impatient. Again, I'm the perfect example. When I feel like I need more time, I am impatient with my kids and with Kayla. And so I think it's just a natural sort of result of living in a culture that says you need more, and if you don't have more, you need to get more. In order to get more, you need to work harder. You need to do more. And that's where I think Sabbath becomes this really important piece to our lives. And it became an important piece of the story of Israel because Israel lived in that culture too. They lived in a culture and a world that demanded more, right? That they didn't have enough. And Sabbath was God's way of saying, you don't need more. You don't have enough. You do have enough because you have me. You have me to provide for you. So if you remember Israel, right? So if we go back, if we were to look through our story again of Israel in Exodus 16, they are in the wilderness, and they are hungry in the wilderness. They have been traveling for a month in a barren desert, essentially. And they begin to complain. They begin to complain to Moses and to Aaron, their leaders, about, hey, we are hungry. We are hungry. And that hunger is beginning to concern us because we think that hunger isn't going to be satisfied and we're going to die. Now, I think it's okay for us to say that seems understandable. I think that's a fair emotion to have. If me and you were journeying and traveling through a desert and we ran out of food and ran out of water, and nothing around us seems to be able to provide for us in those ways, I think we would probably start to complain and get a little fearful of what was going to come. We're in a very uncertain place in the wilderness. Israel's in a very uncertain place in the wilderness, and they need some sort of certainty that they're going to be okay. The Bible tells us that God hears the complaint of Israel, and therefore he provides for them manna and quail, bread and quail. Manna is this sort of fine substance like bread. In Hebrew, actually translate as what is it? That's what manna means, is what is it? We've tried to reproduce it. We really don't know exactly what it is. But manna in the morning and quail in the evening. And God provides that in this divine supernatural way. God hears the needs of his people in the wilderness, and he gives it to them. He says, you are hungry. I'm going to give you food to satisfy your stomach so you don't have to be afraid of death. Your uncertainty will be met with certainty each and every day. Now that's the story, right? I mean, that we could say, all right, God is provider, check. All right, we can move on. Like that's the story. However, if we were to take a bit of a closer look at the story, there's some details that jump out to me, and I want to present them to you. That in the story, there are these details and oddities that I think are asking for some attention, right? Like, why only gather for one day? Why not gather for two? Why can't Israel gather as much as possible to store it? Why, when they store it, does it spoil? I know we didn't hear that, but in the story, any extra that, if they took more than what was needed for them for the day, it would actually spoil. It would be filled with worms, and they had to throw it out. I mean, ultimately, I kind of ask, why does God care? Because there's a part of me that's like, if God is so concerned about how much they take and how often they take it, maybe he doesn't have enough, and he's trying to ration himself. Well, I don't know if I want to go down that road. But why does he care? If he's God and he has endless resources, who cares if they take more than what they need? And then there's this whole Sabbath instruction. On the sixth day, they take twice as much because on the seventh day, there's not going to be any to gather. Like, those to me, if we're going to be good students of the Bible, those are questions that we should ask, because I think it helps us reveal something more to the story. And what I believe is that this story, the real issue, isn't about manna and quail. The real issue in the story isn't about God providing. The real issue in this story is trust. That God is beginning to retrain his people how to trust him. And the reason I say that is because Israel has just spent generations in captivity as slaves in a culture and a world where there was never enough. They lived under the oppressive rule of a Pharaoh who said that your survival, it depends on how much you can produce. That when you bake bricks, if you bake 10 bricks today, you better be 12 tomorrow. You'll never reach the amount where they say you can stop. That if you take a break, if you rest, if you try to say, you know what, I'm too tired, you risked your life, the life of your family. That your security came through what you could gather and protect yourself. And God realizes this. God realizes that Israel, they have physically left Egypt, but Egypt still resides within them. The voice of Pharaoh still echoes deep within them. And if that's the case, well then I think if we were to take that and sort of apply that over some of these oddities and these strange things in our story, it makes more sense to me. Makes more sense to us, right? That when it comes to this idea of the spoiled man, the bread if they take too much, right? When I grew up, whenever I heard this story and I heard about the people that took too much and then it got spoiled, I always was interpreted that, and I think I was probably even taught, that means they were greedy. They were being greedy. But now that I think about it in light of life in Egypt, they're not greedy, they're scared. They just left a place where they had to try to take as much as possible, and now they're in a place with nothing. They're scared, and so they're going to take as much as they possibly can. They don't know what the next day is going to look like. They've been wandering in a desert day after day after day. And that's what I mean by this story isn't just about bread and quail. It's about trust. The story is more about God, has more to do, though it is a story about God providing, there is a deeper story about God retraining his people to trust him, that it's going to be okay. It's this sort of deeper lesson that God is unveiling to his people. That each day, right, each day God says, listen, take what you need and leave tomorrow for me. I'll take care of tomorrow. You just worry about today. Worry about what you need today, what your family needs today, and tomorrow, I'll take care of tomorrow. You don't have to think about that, right? It's not just that God can sort of stand in front of his people as they collect the man and the quail, and he sort of can stand there and say, I'm God, and look at me, I can provide for you, see? What I actually think God is doing is he's in the midst saying, hey, I'm God, and you can trust me. You can trust me with what you need. This is where I think the Sabbath sort of injects itself. This weird, all of a sudden, there's all this talk of how much to gather, then there's this Sabbath instruction, right? Gather twice as much on the 6th, leave the 7th day. Why is that? Like, why would God add that? And what sort of came to me this week is that when Israel practiced Sabbath, when they gathered enough for the 6th on the 6th day so they could rest on the 7th day, what they were doing is they were actively showing God that, all right, we're going to trust you that what we collect on the 6th day will be enough for both this day and the next day. And what that, to me, is, that's contentment. That's living in a way that says, you know what? This is enough. I don't have to get more. This is enough. That what I have now is enough to satisfy me today and the next day. That I don't have to be worried about the next day and try to get as much as I can today. I'll be okay. I think that's what's such a unique part of this story, is that it's yes, at the top level, it's a story about God providing for his people. And beneath that is a story of God retraining and his people learning to trust him again. And I think even at the very heart of it is us seeing what does it mean to live a life of contentment, not always trying to get more. It's not that you don't have enough yet, it's that we have enough for today. That Sabbath for Israel and for us becomes this sort of declaration that I don't need more today. I don't need to work harder today. I don't need to strive or prove myself today. That my trust in who God is to provide and to continue to provide is evidence in the fact that I'm going to be content with what God's given me. That I'm not going to try to get more. So here's my question. What is our version of manna hoarding today? Maybe it's not food. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's status. Maybe it's achievement, control. Self-preservation, right? Personal sort of security. What's the thing that we are hoarding today in our lives? Maybe a better question to ask is, do I trust God enough to slow down or to stop? Do I trust him enough to say that, okay, what I have today is enough? I can slow down. I can even stop. If we're willing to slow down and stop, we change as a group of people, right? People who believe that there isn't enough, that there's never going to be enough, they become awfully defensive, don't they? They become kind of grabby, try to hang on to as much as they can. But a people who believe that God is enough and can provide for them, they become generous and kind. They serve. They learn to rest. And what's so cool is that when we live as people who trust God, that he will give enough, that will pour over into our community. And people will see us as a generous group. And that's really kind of like a question that I want to pose to you all even now. Like, what if Rise Up Church became known as a place that believes there's enough? There's enough grace that anyone can walk through our doors. There's enough time that we're willing to sit and listen to the stories of others. There's enough compassion in us that we're willing to help out our sisters and brothers. There's enough security in my time and in my resources and in my finances that I can generously give and not be so concerned about whether or not I'll have enough. That what if Rise Up Church became known as a place that believed that there is enough trust in God that we tell people each and every Sunday when they come here, you can rest. You can take a break. You can receive grace and mercy. Israel in the wilderness is their lives are being shifted and changed and transformed. They are no longer living as slaves. They are freed people. They are being taught and reminded of a God who says, not only am I going to provide for you, but you can trust me that I will always provide for you. You don't have to gather as much as you can. You don't have to live this life of fear or uncertainty. That you can be content with what I've given you because I will continue to provide. And for us today, in the wilderness of the modern world, God's telling us the same thing. We don't have to strive and work. We do not have to live in this place of fear that we don't have enough. God is reminding us that we can trust him because he will provide for what we need. And that when we practice Sabbath, when we take a break and rest, what we're doing is we are learning to open up our hands, to be generous, to be compassionate, to be people full of grace and mercy and peace. Because we believe that what God gives us in the moment is enough, and he'll take care of tomorrow. I love to me this was on our this is the Rise Up Church is rooted, is built out of this very verse. Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you, and therefore he will rise up to show you compassion. A people that live and believe that God is enough are people that model this each and every day. And honestly, that's what I love about being part of this church, because I see this time and time again. All right, as we wrap up here, reflect, relate, and practice for you all this week. Reflect is, where do I struggle to believe God has provided enough? Is it your time? Is it your money? Your energy? Where do you struggle to believe that God has provided enough for you for now? A relate question is, how does fear shape the way that I work, save, and spend? And that doesn't just mean your finances. It's your time, your energy, your talents, your skills, whatever it may be. How does fear shape how those things get played out and worked out through the week? And practice is something I think is pretty simple, but can also be very challenging, is what would trusting God look like for you this week? What is one thing that you can sort of look to God and say, all right, God, I'm going to trust you with this. I'm going to trust you with my time. That the time you give me each day is enough for me to get done what I have to get done, and that when I'm done, I can be present with whatever I need to be present with. If it's finances or again, whatever it might be. But what would it look like for you to trust God this week with one thing? Again, maybe if you were a little nervous about taking that hour off last week, here's another invitation for you to try it this week. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for waking us up. We thank you for, just the gift of rest that you invite us into. Father, in a world that demands that we do more, that when we look at others, we may say that I don't have enough yet, but if I work harder, then I will. God, you call us to say and remind us through the story of Israel in the wilderness that you do provide. And that in your provision, we are growing in a trust for you, that not just are our stomachs filled, but our heart gets filled with this faith and trust that you will always provide for us. And for those here this morning, Father, that need to be reminded of that, may your Spirit do its work. Father, for those here who are striving, who feel like they just don't have enough, Father, remind them today, in this moment, that you are enough for them. And since you are enough for them, they are enough for you. And that your grace and your mercy is the thing that sustains us and fills us today, tomorrow, and throughout eternity. Father, whatever seeds have been planted here this morning, may you, by your Spirit's power, nourish and foster and grow. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, friends, if you're able to, I invite you to stand. We're going to close out our time with